So, today we have the 30th of November, 2013 year. We and I, Vadim Zaporozhtsov, and Mikhail Kolesnik, are holding a seminar from the Chakra series. And this seminar is dedicated to the Vishuddha Chakra, or throat chakra. All archived information is available on the Open Yoga website, less than Earl greater than. So, before that, we had seminars on all the chakras, starting with the earth principle. So, friends, today we are waiting for a fascinating, interesting excursion into this kind of, as they say, knowledge. As always, we will begin by analyzing those few widely known treatises mentioning the Vishuddha Chakra that have come down from ancient times. Well, and then we will begin to disassemble them already. And so I will ask Mikhail now for the honor, respectively, of each of these fragments. Then, we're all reading, right? Yes, we read everything in turn. We start. What kind of source, and so on. Come on, Shiva Samhita is the first. In the Chinese, at the top of the yajna, they immediately comprehend all four yogs with their secrets. When Yajin concentrates on this secret place, with a feeling of anger, all three worlds begin to tremble. Even if the mind of one accidentally focuses on this place, it ceases to perceive the external world, and focuses on the world internally. His body never weakens, and remains full of strength for 1,000 years. It becomes as hard as a diamond. When one enters into such contemplation, 1,000 years is like a minute for him. Yeah, wonderful. So, 1 second, let's do a little binding. They all sat up straight, straightened their backs, necks, and heads. Imagine that there is a vase on your head, and you keep it in balance. And now we have imagined the central channel of our body, which goes from the base of our body to the top of our head, goes somewhere along the spine. That is, the throat passes, then somewhere inside the head, it goes, and comes out at the top of the head. Now they touch the dimple at the base of our throat with their hand. Here, somewhere here, if we draw a straight line parallel to the floor, then it will intersect somewhere with our spine, somewhere with the corresponding central channel. This is exactly the localization, or the place where one should look for the Vishuddha Chakra. And today's entire seminar, which will be ours, will be dedicated to this particular Vishuddha Chakra. What is very valuable in this knowledge? Here there is a binding of quite abstract yogic knowledge to the very specifics of the structure of your body. We all have our beautiful bodies. And as yoga teaches, we should treat our bodies like a physicist treats his laboratory, where he can conduct experiments. Our laboratory is with us at any time of the day or night. The yogs and the unity of antiquity have been doing this for many thousands of years before us. And we will probably leave some knowledge behind. Everything that we are going to study with you now, in theory, we can rediscover ourselves if we spend many, many years again. But in their mercy, the teachers have given us texts that describe some conclusions from the knowledge that can be obtained with such a rediscovery. For this reason, accordingly, it means that we remember that this is not abstract knowledge, but quite specific guidelines and comments for our personal practice. So, once again this piece. One more time. Shiva Samhita. Meditating. The Vishuddha meditator immediately comprehends all four yogas with their secrets. When Ijin, concentrating on this secret place, feels anger, all three worlds begin to tremble. Even if the mind of one accidentally focuses on this place, it ceases to perceive the external world and focuses on the inner world. His body never weakens and remains full of strength for 1,000 years. It becomes as hard as a diamond. When Ijin enters such a contemplative state, 1,000 years is like a minute for him. That's wonderful. It was Shiva Samhita. The following is the text that you and I should keep in mind. The following text is a tradition of the Sith. Yes, it turns out. Here, it's difficult in this one. You know, we counted everyone in the West. We put labels on everyone. This one belongs to such and such a tradition. This one is such and such. In the East, everything is so smeared, blurred, that it's hard to say, but generally speaking, yes. Here, and they have such a short one. Brief. Constantly contemplating the self, in the center of the Hantik bell, in the pure center of the Vishuddha, glowing like a lamp. He takes the form of bliss. There was just a mention, so I took it. It is unlikely that we will focus on it too much. But in fact, if there was no more detailed description, then that's what I had to be content with, yes. Here, the next one, often it is just mentioned, is the Nirupana Chakra. Here in the throat, a lotus is common, calling Vishuddha pure, smoky purple in color. All the letters shining on its 16 crimson petals are clearly visible to one whose mind is enlightened in Buddha. At the base of this lotus is a region of ether of a round shape, similar to the full moon. The bija of the barn is sitting here on a snow-white elephant, and his robe is white. Two of his hands hold a noose and a goad, while the other two make a gesture of blessing and averting fear. And this complements its charm. He always has a snow-white deity on his lap, a three-eyed, five-faced woman with 10 beautiful hands, dressed in a tiger skin. His face is connected with that which is born of the mountains of Parvati. And he is known by the name of Sada Shiva. Always blissful, beneficent. Yeah. Next. The Shadi Shakini shining in this lotus is purer than the ocean of nectar. Her robes are yellow, and in her 4 lotus-like hands she carries a bow, an arrow, a noose and a goad. At the base of this lotus, the entire area of the moon is not stained with the sign of the hare. Here is the gateway of the path to great liberation for those who wish to attain the bliss of yoga, seek the senses purified and controlled. A sadhaka who has attained the fullness of knowledge of the Atman through the constant concentration of his consciousness on this lotus becomes a great saint, eloquent, wise, and enjoying unbroken peace of contemplation. He observes the past, the present, and the future, and becomes the benefactor of everything, free from ailments and suffering, long-lived, and, like Hamsa, the destroyer of endless dangers. Yu-game, whose mind is fixed steadily on this lotus, whose breath is controlled by Kumhaka, has the power to pass through the 3 worlds. Neither Brahma, nor Vishnu, nor Hari, Hera, Shiva, nor Suri, nor Ganapathy, Ganesha, are able to resist him. Yeah, wonderful. That is, let's continue with the next one. Then, in fact, as it were, it goes already. Hari. Aha. Hari. I greet Shiva in your Vishuddha, pure and transparent as crystal, the progenitor of ether, liberating the world from darkness. And that one goddess with him, who, like a bird, chakras enjoy the moonbeams emanating from them. Great. So, and we have there a list of bija, the number of petals, and so on. Here's a summary plate, yes. So, let's have another one, so this is it. Such general, common ideas about the Vishuddha Chakra, which are compiled on the basis of these texts. Please. The number of petals. So, the number of petals is 16. So, Vishuddha Chakra is associated, or represented as a kind of lotus, which has 16 petals, friends. Next. Well, there's a bija mantra, a sense organ, an organ of action. Bija mantra ham. The sense organ is the ears, the Vishuddha Chakra is responsible for the sound. And the organ of action, well, respectively, the people. This we can pronounce. There are also bija mantras of the 16 petals themselves. Well, then, probably, hardly remembered. Yes, yes. No, no, it's quite revealing. I'll explain later. But please. Am, im, rom, am, and two such breathy am. Here are 16 of them. Well, they're actually vowels. Vowels. That is, you remember how there are vowels and consonants in any alphabet. And Vishuddha is very interesting in this respect. It is also found there, you know, in Sanskrit. Even I'm probably going to say this wrong now. Rail here in our simple this, vowels are counted there. Here's what we have a little differently. So, great. Well, the shape of the tattva is a crescent moon. She is in a circle of a crescent moon, and so radiant, as if the light of a bright moon when it's cold, you know, we go out and look at the moon. It's so bright, shining, it lights up the road right here in this form it appears. Wonderful, friends. So here we are. This, in fact, is about a squeeze from all the books that are now wandering around Europe and America, concerning, therefore, the chakra, the Vishuddha Chakra. Everything else is either interpretations, or you know, such personal experiences of the Sali who wrote this book, but always you know. The study of any yoga is valuable from the original source, and only then from some subjective experience that one or another person has already received in the future. Therefore, you should know it means, at least by ear, to know these treatises once again, Shiva Samhita. So the texts of Goroko, respectively. Ananda Lahari, Shat Chakra will not fall. So that you can hear them. By ear. So that you then, well, know in general what comes from where. The dating of these texts, as we have already said in our previous seminars, but it is complicated, but it is quite obvious, that these texts arose later than, say, Yoga in the Morning reaped. Much later, incommensurably much later than, say, texts that are somehow related to the Vedas, there are Upanishads, Brahmins, and accordingly, there is nothing more ancient than the texts of the Vedas themselves, such as the Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Sama. Here, therefore, so that you have a very clear chronology in your head. It all started from the belief of knowledge, including the chakras, which in some way probably exists in the Vedas. But this is a separate question, how to decipher it, interpret it, because the Vedas are written in a very allegorical language. As for the later texts, such as the Upanishads, Brahmanas, Aranyagas, there are also some or others. There are also some such moments that one way or another can be interpreted as a description of the chakra. Well, in such a direct, frank way, the chakras are described, well, first of all, in Anandalahari. This is part of Saudari Lahari, as well as in texts that apparently depend on Andalahari. Apparently, Anandalahari is a more ancient text than the same Shiva Samhita. Here. And look, again, the closer to our time, the more decoding, more details, more details. For what reason this happens is a separate conversation. Well, probably it's just that people have already become unable to quickly rediscover obvious things, say, in ancient times. And it was necessary to already know, so point the finger. Here, there is such a chakra, here is another one. My joy. So, now further pay attention to what the throat center function is called and is somehow connected with the sound. The organ that is actually responsible for the perception of sound and for the reproduction of sound. That is, if you recall, say, the previous chakras, then there was a certain discrepancy sometimes in the sense organs. And in the organs of action. Well, or in another way, friends, look, if so, figuratively speaking. We have a channel of information related to sound. Some information can enter us, as it were, and some information can be generated by us. My joy. And in fact, this is such an exchange on this plane with the outer universe. And the exchange is on the outer universe. But I remind you that here. Yes, and accordingly to yogs, which are very strongly associated with this ability to pronounce vibrations and perceive vibrations. The first yoga is, of course, mantra yoga. And the second yoga is necessary yoga. So, well, in a nutshell, let me explain what kind of yoga it is. For those who are generally faced with the teaching of yoga for the first time, we have the ability to articulate speech. We can generate certain vibrations of words. They, in turn, are uniquely connected with the vibrations of thought, and those, in turn, are connected with vibrations. No more, no less, as our basic energy, hence our basic consciousness. But at the same time, we can perceive sound vibrations. I'm talking now, you can hear me. And my speech carries some information. Although, strictly speaking, these are vibrations. But more than that, and you hear with your own ears. Then your ears somehow transmit these vibrations, probably some nerve impulses, which in turn, somehow transmit this phrase. And so on, until your consciousness highlights and recognizes the vibration values. The philosophy there is quite complicated. So it is considered that in addition, yes, and we perceive vibrations with our ears, but in addition, there is a direct perception of vibrations directly. One of the most mysterious areas is, as you know, in the Middle Ages, there was such a concept as the music of the spheres. It is believed that yoga works with this, that at a certain stage of yoga, you have the ability to hear some extremely harmonious vibrations with your ears. And in fact, they are so exciting that the mind is completely absorbed by them and enters into a state of such meditative samadhi. Yoga is built on this. So I always say to those of you who like to listen to music from the player with headphones, you know, you can partly be called yogs. That is, because by perceiving the music that sounds, you pull your consciousness, say, out of the surrounding world, and take it to these spheres. And then in the future, there is a natural ability to feel certain pro-vibrations of the echo of the first mantra. The echo of the creation of the universe there, the echo of the Big Bang. Here. And it is believed that if you tune into this vibration, then you fall into samadhi. So, both there and there the Vishuddha chakra is involved. Because when we pronounce a vibration, we immediately listen to it unconditionally. This is very well known by the teachers there, for example, of the English language. Here we are the whole department of yoga and English, we need to launch everything stronger. So, a person first of all listens to himself, his own language, and only then everything else that he hears around. Therefore, if you really want to learn something, start cramming out loud. So, Vishuddha chakra works both there and there. In addition, here's a look at what kind of thing turns out. She is responsible for what is called space in yoga. Here under the word space, this word is replaced here by the word ether. Ether. As you know, here is a TV broadcast, a radio broadcast. The fact is that well, as such was a very stable idea of the structure of the universe, which, oddly enough, later migrated to the exact sciences, such as physics. It was believed that our whole world is a space of ether, in which there are already some objects or phenomena. But this is, in fact, a fairly primitive representation. Again, if we refer to the texts of ancient yoga, there is a somewhat peculiar understanding of the ether. Well, modern science has shown us that there is no such thing as an independent space, but there is a so-called spatial time continuum. We cannot talk separately about time without space, and vice versa. In other words, in fact, the concept of space is more complex than it seems at first glance. Physicists have made excellent use of this theory. As a result, they have discovered a lot of interesting laws. The output turned out to be, among other things, an atomic bomb. Here, that is, knowledge is power. But it's the same in yoga. If you know how this principle works, then you know, as if there is an opportunity to bypass the space factor. Here, science fiction writers have always had a favorite topic: teleportation, zero transition. I've been reading fiction for so long as a child, right? There they pressed a button and once, they found themselves in another place. Here. In fact, these thoughts are not 1,000 years old. If you read the ancient texts so carefully, there is this factor everywhere that space is overcome. Moreover, inside a person, there are all the necessary tools to work with space and to obtain such absolutely wonderful abilities. So that's what is meant by space. So, usually we have such, as physicists would say there, a kitchen idea. What is space? Well, here we are sitting in the hall now, right? Here is a certain number of cubic meters of space here. Cubature, right. The building. When ventilation was done here, it was a big, very first problem to determine the cubic capacity. Which motor to put more or less. In other words, this is quite concrete. We have such a clear, rigid idea. But in fact, once again, these are our usual momentary ideas. Let's say it is known in the same physics that the space in our hall is curved. The space closer to the floor is more curved than on the ceiling. Why? Because of the Earth's gravity. This is known from science, from the general theory of relativity, as a matter of fact, a well-known topic for a long time. And therefore, we cannot say that there is some kind of rigid space. And the same idea, oddly enough, can be traced in yoga. They operate with a kind of universal concept of space. And our usual physical space, including the space of our hall, is a special case. Moreover, unlike physics there, other special cases, for example, mean the space of your dream. I hope you've had pleasant dreams today. I hope something good happened in your dream there. Question: and where was it? Well, of course, you can, as they say, answer that it didn't happen anywhere, that it was some kind of work of our mind there. The mind generated something there, saw some kind of hallucinations, believing that this is space. Yoga does not agree with this. Yoga says that the space of dreams is the same area of being as the physical space. Then, let's say the memory space. Here you can now plunge into memories of your native places where you grew up. There was a house there was a river flowing, there was a bridge or something. And you have a very clear idea. You can go to the same place as an adult and see that everyone has already concreted everything there. The bridge was demolished. And some kind of zombie was built there instead of a house. Zombie this one, apartment building. For cloning zombies. Here. But inside the memory, after all, everything is completely different. So, we're guarding the computer. Here. And here is the concept of ether. The concept of space in this respect in yoga is more abstract and, oddly enough, even closer to the concept of modern physicists. Although I remind you once again, yoga is not a substitute for science. That is, there are different methods and everything else, but it's very nice when you start to understand something. So, friends, there is such a thing as a place where vibrations propagate. In particular, the vibrations of my voice. And in terms of physical space, this is the space of our room, where these are sound vibrations, air movements. But in the South, it is also stated that if you tune into this universal first space, then these universal first impulses spread there. And we, within us, have the ability to perceive them. And since the property of that space is completely different, then, let's say, you can hear with your ears at some distance. And with some of his thin ears for any unlimited distance. And in yoga, you know, very often they depict one or another in a very strange pose. For example, Yogi Miloric is depicted holding his palm near his ear like this. In the pictures on many, it is believed that he had the ability to perceive these vibrations through this space factor at any distance. And he received through these sound vibrations completely information about the whole world around him. So what's nice about all this? The fact is that everything that yogs did in ancient times can be done by modern yogs. And the question is, when will we start working on ourselves? Yeah. All right. The doctor. Everything is going according to plan. Oh yeah. So, and therefore, pay attention here. You can, as if absorbed into this first space, forget about the particular cases of space. Let's say about our physical space. That's how I talk to one single one, she says. And I say, she lives in the suburbs. He says, I don't like to go to Moscow. And what? Yes, he says, I'm going by train. There are faces all around. Here. Well, really muzzles. Yes, is there that? What is it? On the mirror to blame. Oh yeah. And everything is everywhere. Well, you know, this is our world. They will finish the underpass, some homeless people, beggars, dirt, you know, there are some beggars there with dogs. Well, in general, it's unpleasant. Well, as if you know, you think, Lord my God, what kind of space am I in? But in fact, from the point of view of yoga, this is a special case that you may not notice. Well, you need to transfer your physical body through it. There's no getting away from it. But all the more subtle components can be anywhere else in a different way. But in particular, as in yoga, you know, this is the most. Recommendation, yes, you go in the same train or in a minibus, once you turned on your headphones. Turned on your music, closed your eyes, and was transported to a completely different world. And the muzzles disappeared, you know. Here. Therefore, there is a purely practical side here. But the most interesting, and the most, well, truly fascinating, and difficult to understand section in yoga, is that it is possible to exist and create bodies at the level of space, at the sound level of this level of the Vishuddha chakra. Here, that is, roughly speaking, you can. Your higher self, as it were, has bodies at this level, if I may say so figuratively. And as soon as you comprehend it, all the lower chakras become under your control. That is, if you have taken control of the space, too, and the heart chakra, and the navel chakra, and so on. Everything becomes under control. Just like, you know, how our whole world is painted on a canvas, and then layers on it. But if you control the canvas, you control any part of the painting. If you didn't like something, You tore off a piece of canvas, and that's it. There's no one there anymore. No one will draw graffiti. You understand, right? Here's from a spray can. Because there's nothing to draw on. Here. Therefore, if you want, then you can manage these with those who paint where they don't get, right? Control Vishuddha Chakra, but sensitively. So, it turns out that by concentrating on this chakra, you can achieve your aspect of samadhi. And here I will say a few words. On this occasion. In other words, the goal of yoga is when you know your higher self. But we have a lot of distractions in our lives. If you concentrate and control the Vishuddha chakra, accordingly, you control all the lower distractions. Everyone. And this is a kind of springboard for meditation. That's why meditation, where Vishuddha chakra is used, is based on the fact that you concentrate on the concept of the sound that sounds, and the sound that speaks, and they are extremely powerful. Well, in particular, you can say, Shiva Samhita, where do we have? Now here's a piece of me here. The upper one. And look here. Well. When Ijin concentrates on this secret place, he feels anger. All three worlds begin to tremble. I mean, you know, right? When you really begin to control the canvas of the painting at this level, then all the remaining layers of paint begin to tremble, because they can now be wiped off the face of what is called the earth. And now on. Here's a look, which here is also a very interesting detail that is such a technique given for meditation. Well, first of all, the binding is purely physical. A certain center at the base of the throat. But there is also a more facilitating, if you like, yantra or graphic image, on which you should concentrate. This is a lotus with 16 petals, in the center of which is the so-called bija mantra, or that first mantra that generates the principle of ether, known as Ham. And the petals actually depict, or these petals are vowel letters. That is, it turns out that. What is speech, friends? This is the sound of vowels colored by consonants. You can't pronounce a consonant letter in its pure form. You can only have a combination of the idea of a consonant and the embodiment in a vowel. That's why, you know, such a factor correlates, as the whole world consists of consciousness of energy. You don't see consciousness, but it structures energy. Also, in the alphabet, which goes back to the mantra of yoga, it is precisely believed that, in fact, the life of any letter is given by a vowel and a consonant-only colors. And a very interesting conclusion from this, absolutely wonderful. Friends, in Sanskrit, syllabic alphabet, there is no, say, the letter T, there is a syllable. Because even here I speak Russian, the letter T is actually T, and it turns out if you break it. A consonant that gives life to a vowel. And from this there arises an absolutely wonderful moment for mantra yoga, namely for the correct use of the power of the word. It is believed that the mantra is one of the most powerful sciences in yoga. Moreover, there are methods when you can do truly great things with the help of the word. And all this is in the section Mantra Yoga. And Mantra Yoga, in turn, relies, of course, on mantras or certain words. So, the recording of these words, let's say, in Sanskrit is syllabic. Unlike, say, the Russian language, where we have a separate go. It would seem, well, God be with him. And the conclusions after that are completely, not obvious. But this is more, by the way, to Mantra Yoga. In the State Duma, in my opinion, they once conducted an exam on the knowledge of the Russian language, wrote a dictation, and, in my opinion, almost 80% wrote at best a 3. Why? Because our sound and spelling are so different that you have to be, I don't know, a professor of linguistics there to remember it all. And you remember that if the law is violated there by more than 80% of the residents, then this is no longer the law. The law is what is for the majority, not for the minority. In other words, this is our payback for misunderstanding. For not understanding what is called a word, vibration. For not understanding how, of what bricks this vibration, which carries knowledge, consists. Yes, so it's very interesting that Vishuddha Chakra, just all these petals are responsible for consonants. We agree. In other words, it is like some kind of energy basis for any consciousness. Therefore, any idea, even the craziest one, which can be expressed in verbal mantras, tends to come to life. And as a result, there is such a concept in mantra yoga as the power of the word. With the help of a mantra, you can do miracles. You can bring back to life with the right word, but you can kill. Do you understand? Wrong. And so, later in this seminar, we will talk about this very interesting ability of the Vishuddha Chakra to create Maya. Or in another way to charm with a word. One of the images that corresponds to the Vishuddha Chakra is a peacock. You know peacock. So this is the one. How is that? Remember, right? This cartoon was about Munchausen. Yes, yes. Can't you see we're eating? Do you remember this there? Yes. He's very handsome. Especially when he's fanning his tail like that. He's all the colors of the rainbow. Well, and in order for the peacock's girlfriend to like it. So you understand, right? He fascinates her. He says I'm beautiful all around. There is no one else. Here. This, by the way, guys, take note. Here. It means that you will not be eloquent. You will not sing praises to your girls. They will not appreciate the power of your consciousness. Because there is nothing to grasp consciousness for. And how to determine which man is more preferable, which is less preferable. It's very hard to determine. What is consciousness? It is not graspable. So therefore, there must be some kind of thing that, well, could manifest consciousness most beautifully, simply and quickly. And what is it? It's definitely a poem that's out there. I remember a wonderful moment. You appeared before me, didn't you? And the girls like it. I like to listen to compliments. But stupid young men for some reason do not understand this. Like, well, I'll tell you that I love you. Well, I love you. Well, that's what else to repeat the same thing. These are stupid men. A smart man would say, oh, moon-faced. Oh, the fairest before the light, whose mine is there. The dream of my whole life, and so on. Why? Because, you know, that's just like a peacock's tail so many times. And he charmed his girlfriend, just like a literate man. If he is endowed with a strong consciousness, then he knows how to show it. And the speech center, Vishuddha Chakra, is the most convenient tool for this. The most convenient. Because all the other expressions of their, so to speak, lack of recognition, their interest in a person of the opposite sex, they are less, well, so eloquent. Well, maybe someone should throw out a knee there, take off his hat, there and kneel there. Yes, nice to the girl, nice. But not 100%. But if he means that he composed some kind of poem, and even started it there at night under the window on his Brunhild, preventing the neighbors from singing it. Yes. Why? Because this is a very strong indicator of the strength of a man's consciousness. Well, for women, of course. Therefore, as one of these, you know, there are already a number of such practical indirect conclusions. But what can we take from Vishuddha? Therefore, what is the conclusion? Guys, we work with voice, we work with versification, with praise. And a girl's compliments are never enough. Remember, right? There are few and indecently few, you know. Here. Yes. So now I'm going to ask Mikhail, respectively, to introduce us to Arthur Avalon, here with those excerpts that. So, in the kidneys. In two of his texts, there is a description of the Shika Chakra. This is the first introduction to Maha Nirvana Tantra. And he writes the following. Vika Chakra or Haradikana, the abode of the goddess of speech, is located Naganakata, at the lower end of the mountain Kanhamula. Well, here it is. The tattva of this chakra is ether. Her lotus colors. Her lotus is the color of smoke or fire seen through smoke. It has 16 petals bearing red vowels. Am, am, rim, rim, am, 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 am. Here, but they turn out to be double, as it were, because they have a long and short I. These are the features, indeed, of this alphabet. We will not delve into. Yes, well, they just repeat themselves here, and many may think that repetition. But in fact, there are just long and short ones. The musical notes are Nishada, Rishabha, Ganhara, Shadaya, Madhyama, Daivata, and Panchamada. The poison in the 8th petal is 7 mantras Hum Hat, Haushat Vashat, Svaha Svaha Nama. And in the 16th petal is the nectar of Amrita. In the pericarpi, there is a triangular space, inside of which resides the androgynous Shiva, known as Ankanarishvara. Here is the sphere of the full moon of the ether of his Bijay Ham. With his Bijaya porridge. And the modula porridge is transparent, rounded in shape. The deity Akasha herself is dressed in white and sits on a white elephant. It has 4 hands, which it holds a noose, a pasha, and a goad Ankusha, depicts a wise blessing, eliminating fear. Shiva is white, with 5 faces, 3 eyes, 10 hands, dressed in a tiger skin. Near him, a white Shakti Shakini, yellow decorated, holding a bow in 4 hands, was whipping a loop and a stirrup. Now, this is the conduct of Mahanirvana Tantra. And now snakes. Snake power. Yes, yes. Now the next fragment will be from the text Snake Power, which was written by John George Woodrow, aka Arthur Vallon. This is, well, actually, one of the authoritative sources. Somehow, from the base, he takes the Chakra Nirupana. Here, in the spinal center, at the base of the Kamul throat, there is the Vishuddha Chakra or Haritasthana, the abode of the goddess of speech. 16 petals of a smoky purple hue, on which there are 16 vowel letters with bindu on them. Accordingly, am, im, rom, and am, o and tu with a breath of am. According to the Devi Bhagavato Purana, this center is so called because the jiva is purified in it through the vision of Hamsa. Here is the center of the white circle of Akasha or Tattva of ether, whose bija is Ham. Akasha is dressed in white and sits on a white elephant. His mandalas are shaped like a circle. How else is there a piece? Sometimes it is represented as a circle with many points in it. As stated in the Parnasara Tantra, Akasha has the unfortunate sushira of these chindras, or gaps between its substance. This is because it has such a nature, things exist in space. Vishuddha is a place of purity. Here the mind becomes clean with an excellent element. Wonderful, friends. These are quite stingy in fact, details that we read from Arthur Avalon. And now let's go back to the main properties of this center again. So, the property of this center is space, as well as everything related to the vibrations of sound that we can generate ourselves, or that we can perceive. Well, really, space is an extremely strange thing. Even modern science tells us that, in fact, our usual little ideas about space are, in fact, a habit. Moreover, even modern science is similar to the theory of yoga. It says that once the principle of space itself was generated from the axiomatics of yoga, from ancient sources of yoga. It is known that the whole world was created with the help of a mantra. And in fact, the body of the mantra has become a space. Moreover, there was once a time when there was neither time nor space. And then, this root cause unfolded itself, both in time and in space. And this is a very strange transition. How is it that there was a time when there was no time? And where everything was when there was no space? An extremely strange transition, which our ordinary mind does not comprehend. It seems very strange to us, but as yogs teach in ancient times, if you start meditating on the very principle of space, then what you think is strange and does not fit in your head, you will not just begin to understand, friends. This is not enough. You will suddenly begin to feel it in yourself. And you will begin to understand that the structure of your body is as grandiose as the structure of the entire universe. And these are the remarks, provisions and mentions that we have read about in the texts. These are hints, pushes for our consciousness, so that we rediscover these structures within ourselves. Clearly, I remind you once again that if it says that one or another chakra should meditate on a goddess or on some elephant, then this does not mean that there is an elephant sitting somewhere inside you. This suggests something else, that this is some kind of figurative expression of that certain logic of the structure of your body, which according to others, you can't express it in any other language. And it is not for nothing that, let's say, India has become, in general, the founder of all mathematical ideas in this regard. The idea of zero originated in India. The idea of negative numbers originated in India. The idea that how does say 0 relate to some other numbers also leads to the idea of infinity. In other words, there is another universal law to explain our device. This is the law, the language of mathematics. And it is also present here through some geometric shapes or through some geometric images. In the end, as they say, this very Heisenberg, after reading Plato's Thea, came up with the idea of the quantum mechanical structure of our world. Plato, by the way, had similar ideas with these treatises, that all the first elements have a different form. And some of them are in the form of triangles, in the form of circles, others there are crescents, these are squares there, and so on. So therefore, look at how these texts should be perceived. These are like pointers for personal practice. Here you have started to work on yourself, doing types of yoga. Then something began to open up to you, and you begin to correlate your inner experiences with those treatises, with those teachings that you have read. And only in this way will you begin to understand the true meaning of Chuck's description. But God forbid you to take it literally. Because right now, there are crowds of not quite sane, so-called yogs from the Yajins walking around the West, who literally believe that there is a lotus with 16 petals somewhere there. And there are some letters painted on them, scrawled on them. It's much more complicated, friends, but also more exciting. And now on. Let's focus once again on the basic principle of this lotus space. Let's reflect with you, but what is space? Well, it's quite obvious that this is some kind of container for something else. In other words, let's say space and nothing are two different things. Well, in particular, there may be a vacuum, empty space, as it seems to us, there is nothing there. But in the same way, there is nothing between two fingers when you put them together. Well, there's nothing between two fingers when they're there. When you put it together, and the space of space is different nothingness, do you understand? Zayu, something delicious has come to us. Accepted. Here. And it is clear that this is a kind of container of something. On the other hand, we remember that our higher self, as yoga teaches, is on the other side. It is beyond the limits of space and time. That is, it is pointless for our higher self to search in space. It does not exist. It's out of space. Therefore, to the question, where is your higher self? In what part of the galaxy? In this room, on Alpha Centauri? Or maybe, you know, as if almost immortal in a chest, there somewhere on a tree, there is your hidden, this is the higher self. This is a meaningless question. Hence, the following thing is born, that as soon as you become aware of your higher self, the concept of space will become under your control. And, in fact, you can move to any point in space. In ancient texts, we read absolutely wonderful fairy tales, you know, fairy tales, even they are called by someone. That Egan there, who has reached some level in yoga, decided, generally speaking, to ask how the universe works. And went to the edge of space. Well, how to relate to this, right? Here I took it, went, how to drive on an airplane, on a rocket there, or something else. And the fact is that if you go to the level of your higher self, then the concept of space is secondary. It's like you've come out of any point, and you can enter any point again. Here. But it's absolutely aerobatics to realize yourself. It is much more interesting for us, so to speak, beginner yogs. Yes, we are not magicians, we are just learning. We remember? We have our manifestation in our world. What is called prana? Prana. Prana is a kind of stream of consciousness energy that comes out of our higher self, which is outside of time and space, but enters into time and space, where your bodies are located. Well, once again, you are all sitting in the hall now. Your higher self is outside of time and space, and your bodies are sitting here inside time and space. Your consciousness, I hope, is riveted to the meaning of our seminar. And your higher self, God knows where, somehow, it means that it receives this information. Here. Later, we will touch upon such a thing, that there is another such plane, a boundary dividing space. Hence, our higher self is also the so-called plane of mind. It is believed that the chakra of the mind, which is located in the area, means this third eye or between the eyebrows. It is higher than the concept of space. Accordingly, it can be concluded that the mind can function outside of space. In other words, you can imagine then this scheme, when one, being aware of his mind, could really transfer his mind to any point in space and draw information from there. This is what is meant by the fact that we eat there went to explore the universe. Here, or another joke too, also goes around, but I heard it in Tantric Buddhism, that the Buddha gathered his disciples and said, "Guys, it's time for us to go to the universe." Well, we flew to travel. Well, all of his disciples then, by the power of yoga, somehow moved for a long time, and when they arrived there, it turns out that the Buddha is already there. They were very surprised. "Buddha, well, what are you doing at all? You and I kind of flew together." "Yes, you're already there." And he, well, there was the following logic here. That is, you are transported through, well, as if projecting space, and I am. Well, you go to a more universal level of space and move through it, and I move through a higher level, that is, my mind. It's enough for me to think, and I'm already where I wanted to think. A very strange thing indeed, but it would seem that maybe this is a hallucination. Maybe they smoked something there, but I do not know if they ate something there. As many people now claim in all seriousness that they say some kind of nonsense is needed, therefore the same result. Immediately called, frankly speaking, yoga and dope in any form has nothing to do with each other. At least for the simple reason that you start to be addicted to dope and yoga leads to freedom. You understand, right? In other words, everything that you achieve in yoga, you should achieve without dope in principle. Do you understand? In principle, no matter what kind of smart guy was found there and started telling you something. So, look what kind of thing it turns out that, as we have already said in previous classes, first of all, if you control the Vishuddha chakra, you control all the lower chakras with everyone. Well, with all manifestations. Tactile, vision then. What else do we have left? There was a sense of smell, a sense of touch, a taste. On the other hand, you remember this law. If you want to develop the next chakra, break the previous one. Therefore, if you have problems developing your intellectual abilities, or the principle of reason, you should start, oddly enough, with the principle of speech. Speeches, friends. Do you want to develop your mind? Start with the language. This was perfectly understood, I must say, in the Middle Ages, or let's say in later times. They forced everyone to study and memorize Greek Latin. In general, if you are interested in what they taught there in these medieval universities, in Germany or by the way, most of the time they hammered Greek and Latin there. But on the one hand, Latin was a universal language of communication. How do you remember what Latin is? There was a Roman Empire, it fell apart, it became, as they say, independent states, but Latin remained. Therefore, everyone understood each other through Latin. But the idea was something else. The idea is not even that you are there. And Greek, it was even less used, okay. And the fact is that when you start cramming and repeating, and repeating, and repeating, you involuntarily begin to work with your speech and involuntarily begin to awaken the Vishuddha chakra. And if you start to awaken, willy-nilly, your mind begins to work in full. Moreover, I remind you that in ancient times, the Vedas were not written down, but transmitted orally. A person had to learn to recite them aloud from memory. They're not small, I have to say. Open up, we have the Rig Veda there. We have a wonderful library. Let's brag then. We opened a library there. Rig Veda with 3 volumes extreme. So that you roughly represent the volumes. Here, 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 please, yes. That's how I'll try to convey it. Sometimes people ask why they weren't recorded. And imagine that you are. And this one, what's his name? Traveling, right? Yes, with these. And, well, you have to understand, what kind of font is here, what kind of paper, and what kind of paper was there before. This volume is about it, this is it. On palm leaves, right. And we are told that knowledge was brought to India, so these are the tribes of the Aryans who came from Central Asia there, and so on. Imagine that, right? If they would have started dragging, it means that this is all on their back. We also have to carry food. Here. But one way or another, even for a modern person, to memorize and remember from memory these 3 volumes. Well, actually, this is a challenge for his intellect. You understand, right? This is one trouble. And this is one trouble, yes, absolutely right. This is the Rig Veda. Yes. And generally speaking, there are canonically 3 Vedas, because some refer to the Veda from Harva, some do not refer to the Vedas. And besides that, the Veda itself is Yajurveda. In other words, your cart is simply filled to the brim with all the texts. So that's it. And it develops intelligence extremely strongly. Here I just once witnessed such a thing. I have a personal one like this. It means that I am in one rather inaccessible place, so I have communicated with a Brahmin. A good Brahmin, a real one, without fools. Well, first of all, let's start with the fact that he looked like Europeans. Though dark-skinned, like Hindus, right? But the second thing that just literally struck me, he had a speech delivered. Like a good professor of philosophy at Moscow State University. Very clear, clear. You know, here is a person who speaks meaningfully every word. You know, unlike the numerous Hindus here, by the way, I don't know who. These were the Vedas. They very clearly demanded to master the methods of consciousness, the methods of speech. And it all started with recitation, with oral repetition, in order to indirectly develop the Vishuddha chakra. And it automatically develops the mind. You remember, yoga tells you, the mind is not a master, it is a servant. But at the same time, it needs to be honed every day. You have to work on yourself every day. If you can't hone it by conventional means, mantra yoga, recitation aloud of ancient texts, and mantra will perfectly polish your mind through Vishuddhakar. That is, here's another thing. I think it's great to read classics, in fact, for the development of such a mental ability. Well, yes, here I am at one time, I am the same. I read Alice in Wonderland aloud to my nephew. I still remember all those rhymes there about cooking, sticky balls there, do you remember there? They were poking around newer and grunting Ziliuki, like Mimsiki in a move. And you know when oh, be afraid, Jabberwocky son. He's so poor. Shuddered, yes. And it means this. It means this. I was practicing. Yes, so, look, control. Vishuddha chakra controls up and down. The positive side. The power of the word is in your hands. You can use the word to control others. This is the Vishuddha chakra. But the downside is that you can abuse this power of words and get carried away in such chatter. that you will begin to revive, obviously, not viable schemes according to which people will live and get, as they say, a negative result. So, unfortunately, there is such a stratum of talkers from politics who speak perfectly, and entire nations are throwing death. Well, the most eloquent situation recently was with Germany. You remember, Adolf Ivanovich Hitler came, he could speak very well. His speech was rude, but everyone listened with a bang. Then it became clear to him, so it was not up to speeches. Goebbels began to speak for him. He also speaks beautifully. And listen to him, some of them are even historical. I remember that he had this very historical moment when he called for total war. Newsreel footage has been preserved. The whole hall was enchanted. And there are, some veterans from the Eastern Front. One of them doesn't have an arm there, the other one doesn't have a leg, he's on crutches there. And those, then, clap, hurrah, hurrah, we go on to fight. They should have gotten the brains. And this is the charming power of the word, friends. And God forbid, there will be some such master of the Vishuddha Chakra who will literally charm entire nations. And throw them God knows in what incomprehensible directions. Therefore, you remember, a big force is a big responsibility. If you master the methods of the Vishuddha Chakra, you will have a very big opportunity, on the contrary, to save or direct people in the right direction. Here we are reading, say, the Victorian era. The captain of the ship. The fire started on the ship. And there are very harsh morals. The captain of the ship on the ship could shoot anyone, if then, it means that people's lives are in danger. A calm captain comes out, and with a calm word, a fire. Well, never mind, put it out. And that's all with your calmness. Everyone ran, put it out. If he had trembled even a little, panic would have started, the ship would have capsized, everyone killed each other, and Here it is mine, my embodiment of vet. Here. My 4. No, let the hair climb. For educational purposes, I really like it when children climb at my seminar. Friends, the whole point of what I'm saying is, here he goes. Small, pretty. Here. If he bothers you, yoga bothers you too. I understand. Because sometimes I hear, oh, we want to get higher knowledge, and there are children running, jumping. Nothing, endure it, you will develop a pratyahara, a one-way meditation on words. Here. Mayusayat. Children never interfere with yoga. Nowhere and never. All the same, the background is what you need, it will reach you. And the fact that it didn't come, it wouldn't have come anyway. Here. So, we go further. So, the power of the word. A powerful force. You can save the word. Again, if we recall the same Hitler, after all, everything began quite like that, so modestly. He breathed confidence into the nation with his speeches. He revived her. He gave the feeling that everything was in their hands. He seemed to appeal to the higher self of every German, that here you are strong, and so on. And indeed, in a few years, he raised the infantry from his knees to Germany. But then he also drove an even bigger problem with the power of words. Therefore, there is a very great danger of Vishuddha Chakra. As it will be subject to you, there will be the ability to do a lot of things. But the slightest dream of the mind, and you will start voicing some delusional ideas, and yourself fall under the hypnosis of your own word. That's right. Yes. About this again, remember, even let's not take Germany, let's take the USSR. The 30s. Now one speaker, then another speaks. He starts saying some kind of thing, sometimes outright nonsense, absolutely right. Here. And then he begins to believe in it himself. And this is a very big danger, that you have such a displacement in your head. On the one hand, you suddenly realize the power of the word, that you can do a lot with the help of the word. What do you say? And everyone begins to believe and act according to it. On the other hand, you sometimes think that whatever you say, it will happen. Moreover, sometimes you start talking some outright nonsense, but the fact that you uttered it, it makes you not only charm others, but also charm yourself. And you begin to believe in the nonsense that you speak from the grandstand. This is a monstrous danger. There is no worse, because all the lower centers are disconnected. And, as it were, they are covered with the veil of Maya. There remains only the highest center, logic, reason. And indeed, again, who was the enemy of the same Hitler? Just intellectuals who are not so much for the form of who says what, but for the essence. They literally discovered their Minecraft, revered, and were horrified. Because when it's said from the podium, well, you always make corrections. This man, for the sake of a red word, you know, will not spare his father. Here, and when you start to logically analyze what they are calling for, that's where all the problems come out. Therefore, in order to secure the use of the Vishuddha chakra, it is necessary to simultaneously develop an intellectual center and analyze what you hear. There will always be such speakers who will say such nonsense, but it will sound so sweet that you will involuntarily follow him. Many politicians use it, but it's worth stopping, rewriting what you heard on a piece of paper, and analyzing it in a calm atmosphere. Will you grab your head? What is he carrying? So the next thing is, in order not to fall into the clutches of these talkers who own the word, yoga recommends the following scheme to us. Remember, right? Control the chakra above and the chakra below. Then the chakra is in the middle, it has nowhere to escape. You sort of clamp it in a vice. What is the chakra below? Cordial. Anahata. What is above Aina, or reason? So, examine any chatter on these two chakras. And then, if something is really valuable, useful, it will not contradict. But if there's any nonsense or anything there, well, there's clearly something so anti-human there. Let's go burn someone there in concentration camps. Or else. Friends, this is the crowd effect. You should get into a big demonstration there, and you will unwittingly be for yourself. Crucify him. Remember, as enemies of the people, it means this. What's everyone doing there? Yes. And it happens all the time. Therefore, we remember, yes, that the Vishuddha chakra has to protect itself from falling under this magical influence, like a peacock. It is necessary to include both brains and feelings. And the same applies to girls. You remember, yes, I have already given the men a recipe for how to fool you with poetry. But do you think he will compose them himself? No. There is such a sums function now. So, by order, they will send you a new one every day for your girlfriend. He's got brains, too. Yes. That's why you should. When someone sings praises to you, it means that you get serenades under the window. You still have to turn on your brains and your heart. And then, if everything comes together, well, then yes, we are listening. And if not, then you can fall into the clutches, then this unnecessary cavalier. Here. So, that's wonderful. How much time do we have? Questions, friends? Yes, please ask questions, let's do it. There are no questions. In touch? Yes, please. We are in touch, friends, asking questions. You have 50 how many people there? Really not a single question. Yes, please.
Well, if, accordingly, the principle of space is lower than the principle of reason, then can we say that, as if this space cannot be listened to, it is created by reason? Yes, no.
And, as if the mind, in turn, is the basis for the canvas of space to arise. That is, all the spaces, in all of its even the most exotic types. And in yoga, there are very exotic types of spaces, yes, that is, we simply do not know. And many of these texts do not reach us. So, come on. It turns out that the very possibility of the emergence of the concept of space itself, it can arise no earlier than the concept arises that reason can arise. Generally speaking, all of this refers to the moment of creation of the universe. I remind you that the one prana divided into two parts and began to diverge. The part that one part became energy, the other part became consciousness. As they diverged, they made some kind of intermediate alliances, as it were. Once they have slightly diverged, there is an intermediate union of the energy of consciousness between them, where, let's say, the power of consciousness is maximum, and the energy is the most refined. Time has become the principle of reason. Then they went even further, separated. The energy became a little rougher, the awareness less strong, once the principle of space arose. And so to the principle of the earth. Therefore, strictly speaking, the basic fundamental ingredients from which space is made are, in fact, the same as the ingredients from which time is made. But there is a question not in essence, in form, there are more subtle vibrations, if you like. Although, again, our language probably does not fully express all these nuances. But once again, the logic is this: at creation, at the creation of the world, or at your entry into this life. Once we were all born here nicely, we created the principles of mind, space. So, what's next for us? Yeah. Yes. And then I have the principle of it now. Throat chakra. Yes. Very helpful, right? For Vishuddha chakra. So, who else has what? Yes, please. Part-time students, come on. Yeah. What do they write? Ivan Dubovic. In the text you can find about the ability to move in space, but there is no crow movement in time. If we fix space, does it follow that we have fixed time as well? This is a difficult question. In fact, this is a difficult question with time. The fact is that there is another factor. This is the law of karma, which says that first there is a cause, and then there is an effect. In fact, this is the law of linear unfolding of time. And we live with you, as you understand, when we have a cause first, and then an effect. It was only in Alice in Wonderland that it was the other way around. Remember, right? There's an ant. First she bled from her finger, and only then she pricked this finger. That is, a completely abstract such thing, and why not? Why not be in this world? Therefore, it turns out that all events, as long as we are in the plane of space and time, and linear in the plane of karma, then it is clear that if there, let's say, imagine that you are feeling bad now, then it follows that you once made the prerequisites for you to feel bad. And not the other way around. You are now suffering for what you will have there, for what you will do tomorrow, right? So that's how they punished you for the future, right? Some parents beat their children like that, they beat them for the future. But it still means you'll get a deuce. It's better now, in advance. In advance. Here. Therefore, with time in this sense, the same story, by the way, as with space. Also, you see, here is such a very tricky tricky topic, linking. On the one hand, it's like our higher self, it's outside of time-space. And from the level of your higher self, you can already create, generally speaking, anything. But it is necessary to rise to this level. And as long as the tails of your prana are stuck inside time and space, and until you pull them out, you don't actually have such an opportunity. Moreover, look, the concept of space has also come. It came, yes. Yes. Okay, this is a separate topic, let's not focus on it now. Then, what does she have there? Anna Lutzis asks the question. How do they fall under the hypnosis of their own words, if the mind is higher? That's the point, friends, that, first of all, the mind. Well, I mean, are you hypnotizing yourself or others? Hypnosis of your own words. It turns out, once again, friends, there is such a thing in yoga as 3 levels of bodies. One of the most subtle levels is the causal level. And so, if you know, to speak so figuratively. Figuratively. How did a girl get married to such a jerk? She should have turned on her brain when he was courting her. And she was charmed. You understand, right? Why? Because there are opportunities to influence more subtle structures, which, in turn, imperceptibly affect us, including the mind. This is the level of the so-called causal body, or the entrance to the deeper layers of our device, where, roughly speaking, it is very easy to inspire a person to give out wishful thinking. And here is the factor of how we introduce ourselves, our mind into such a state that the picture we are voicing is too sweet, and we want to believe in it. And we turn off our mind ourselves. Here. There's more. There is this. She's better at asking a question. How does a written word work? For example, poems sound like an inner sound when read to yourself. I didn't understand the question. Can I repeat it? Yeah. I didn't get it either. All right, come on, friends. Me. Friends, I ask you, you ask, well, such, as it were, questions in more detail, because if they are a little out of context, it is very difficult to tune into what was meant.
He draws some analogy with the idea that this is when we read the written poems, and this is some kind of inner sound. Well, maybe.
How does the written word affect? No, well, it's written in general. How the word is written works.
Yes, it's one thing to read the sound, but another thing about yourself, that is...
Well, friends, you are still any word, as if when you see it, you generate a vibration inside yourself, as it sounds. Another conversation is that this is a vibration at the level, so to speak, of your mind. Otherwise, you wouldn't understand the meaning of it. But the trouble is that to concentrate, when we have a high level of concentration, we can calmly concentrate on the inner. What arises? But when we have a low level of concentration, and we don't say it, then we, well, as if the mind can eat, and think about something else. We kind of think like, but we don't understand. And so, of course, it's better. What is Vereshchagin? So, questions from the audience. Yes, please.
The grid, the center, it is associated with transition and wakefulness, not everything, and so on.
Here, oh, wonderful questions for the top 5, friends. In general, the top 5 is the future of this one. What should she call it after all? And when you have the item, remind me, I promised a 5. Here. Yes, friends, and this is where Vishuddha Chakra has a very strange ability. It is believed that she is responsible for making you fall asleep, and also responsible at the time of death for, roughly speaking, separating the subtle bodies from the gross body. Well, as a consequence, for the ability. You know how to put it like this. Travel in a subtle body. I remember that in the former Soviet Union, there was at one time a very craze for astral travel. However, I don't know what they mean by this, but in fact, probably there was just this thing. Therefore, strictly speaking, our consciousness is tied. My Zaya has come. The perception of our bodies is tied to the space of our bodies by the head center. And the impact on this center, that's how the ability to get out of bodies is achieved. Or fall asleep. Or at this moment, when you know one space has gone and the other has not come, peek into this one. Click, what is there? There's something going on the other side of space, you know. And indeed, it is described in many, many texts that these are the first steps in these all-astral journeys. The co-possession of Vishuddha begins. So that's wonderful. Who else? Yes, please. If the throat center is responsible for speech, can we say that it is also responsible for self-expression and creativity? Yes, yes, yes. But look, let's be like this, if strictly speaking. After all, we can create not only with the help of words, but with the help of forms. We can paint a picture. Or, there's a massage therapist who, he does a massage, as if he is playing a musical instrument on the human body. You understand, right? And so on and so forth. Therefore, this is one of the channels through which creativity can be manifested, may be one of the strongest. And indeed, let's say in the Middle Ages, yes, that's it. We have to go here. And indeed, in medieval India, let's say that Bananda Lahari was considered the highest art. This is the art of speech. In the ancient Vedas, the sages of the Rishis first of all mastered the art of the word, the secret word. As it is said, it means I forgot. What kind of person am I now? Well, hardly. What is it? I forgot which mandala, which mantra from the Rig Veda. Now I'm unlikely to find it from memory. Well, let's reproduce in my own words now that the speech is divided into 4 parts, so known to the wise. 1/4 is used by people. I've already forgotten. I forgot everything, I'm starting to lie. How very beautiful it is there. And who remembers? I just forgot, yes. That is, in terms of the fact that it was believed that the really creative manifestation is the strongest through the word. The world is created with words and mantras. You can control it with words and mantras. In other words, this may be the strongest manifestation of the consciousness factor. Easily controlled, always at hand. Easier to perform. Here. Therefore, actors, let's say, are determined by voice. Not by facial expressions, not by movements, but by voice. Here. So, who has any more questions? Yes, please. The Japanese have a very slender system. The Japanese, what? They took death very lightly in the Middle Ages. I don't know how it is now. And they have a very beautiful explanation. When they die, everyone lives there with them sometimes. At the same time, the girls often finished. They were also with the samurai. They often stuck a dagger into their mountain. If we add to this the method of hanging, if it can be explained. Full solitaire. From the point of view of some kind of consciously leaving world, right? But if death occurs, and the effect on the throat, can we talk about any features? Well, it seems to me that the attribution to the Japanese of excessive, this cruel monstrosity, that they have a cult of death, that there is a little bit of harakiri, there is that disregard for the life of another. Indeed, there are these memories of those who were there during the Second World War. You honor the Americans. And it seems that the Germans are just resting there compared to the cruelty of the Japanese. Yes. I don't think that's the case. I'm not sure that anything has changed since the Middle Ages. You have to understand two different things. That a true samurai, who had this competent attitude to death, to all the numerous new models that just started. Well, you know, how this craze went and everything. Well, how they just start mowing it down. Two big differences. Indeed, for a samurai, this is the concept of duty, which is above all. And in this sense, in order to better concentrate on your duty, it is really best to reflect on your death. When you start clinging to all the tempting things, because, well, at death's door, everything somehow looks different, as if you were just going to live forever. And then, of course, this is already the beginning of abuse. I just want to say in defense of the poor Japanese. Well, it seems to me that they are not so bloodthirsty. That is, they are not so cruel, they do not deify it so much there, this, well, as if death. And as for, then, as it is, the easiest way to leave this life, yes, well, generally speaking, in the texts, in yoga. It was believed that any sage could leave with an effort of will. That is, it is not necessary to do all harakiri or anything else there. There you go. And as for how these methods are connected there. So there. Kill yourself and others. Well, I don't know what to say about this. Indeed, the carotid arteries, here they are. Blocked, bang and all, and died. Here. That is, there may be some special spiritual way of death that I do not know. Friends, I find it difficult to answer. Well, in general they say, let's be more life-affirming, right? Let's rather talk about her falling in love by selling her. There is a question. This time in Russian, she asks, what is meant by owning a chat? Oh, good question. That's exactly what we're going to talk about in the next part of our seminar. So, great. Who else has what? Everyone has nothing. So, a short break.